Jurassic World Rebirth is basically right around the corner. It's also Jurassic June. In order to celebrate these two things, I figured we can go back to all 6 of the previously released Jurassic franchise movies and take a look at the creatures in those movies, their designs, and, all of that relating stuff. We have just completed the original trilogy, so now it's time to start the new trilogy, the Jurassic World trilogy, starting off with the 2015's Jurassic World. Let's get right into it. This one is probably my favorite of the Jurassic World trilogy. I have very fond memories of seeing this movie. I was on vacation with my family. We were in Texas in Padre Island, and the movie had just released, and we were like, hey, let's go and see it. And we went and saw it, and it was so freaking cool. I loved that movie, man. I still think it's a fantastic movie that has a lot of really fun and awesome moments. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the creatures of this movie. So let's do that. Okay, so the first dinosaur that we get to see in the whole movie is probably the most accurate in the whole movie, in the whole trilogy, really. That is the bird at the beginning of the movie. We get to see its foot go down, and it's obviously a theropod foot, and then we get to see the whole bird, and it's CGI, so they had to model it, and it's the most accurate one that we've seen probably ever. Beautiful, just beautiful work done right there. After that is the Mosasaurus. Now, the Mosasaurus is a cool one. This is the first time that a marine reptile, officially canonically makes its debut in the Jurassic franchise. Of course, there was basically the Tylosaurus in the Jurassic Park, the game, but of course, most elements of that game are not really canon, and if anything, most of it's soft canon by this point. This is the first on-screen marine reptile, and it honestly looks pretty good. Of course, it's oversized, but the whole general shape certainly does match up to a Mosasaurus. The only thing that really bugs me about it is the fact that it is covered in osteoderms, which, that's something that Mosasaurus did not have. Mosasaurs were giant marine lizards, and they had an overall smooth skin texture. This is, of course, something that makes it seem more like a crocodilian, which is I don't think that's really a comparison that we really need to make because of how distinct they are. I mean, crocodilians, crocodiles, modern day crocodiles, those are archosaurs. Mosasaurs are not even archosaurs. They're a completely different type of reptile entirely. And I know there's going to be a lot of people who say, oh, it's probably just filled in with crocodilian DNA. I don't care. It's still a movie design. They can design it however they want. And that's just the one thing. I just don't like that about it. But again, the mouth looks pretty good. It's got a lot of teeth. It even has the pterygoid teeth, which are the small teeth on the roof of its mouth, which is something that I really like to see. Overall, I think it's a very good mosasaur design. Next up are the stegosaurs, and this is where we start to get gray. One of the biggest critiques that many people have with the Jurassic World movies, myself included, is that a lot of the movie designs are kind of gray. There's not a lot of color placed into them. They're pretty boring and dull in comparison to what came before. The Stegosaurus is a good example of that. Of course, it is just a background dinosaur in this movie, but even compared to how it was in Jurassic Park 3, it lacks a lot of the coloration that really makes it feel like an actual animal. It's also got a very droopy tail, which is a lot more outdated compared to the way that we even saw it in The Lost World, a while before this had come out. And now I've heard explanations that people have given me as to why it's drooping like that, and that's because it's not being fed properly. And that's a fine explanation, but it's still something that's worth mentioning that's not really too accurate. But it does have all of the things you would expect from a stegosaurus portrayal, like the plates, which are those osteoderms on their back, and the thagomizer, which is that collection of spikes at the end of the tail. The head and everything else seems to be pretty consistent with what we've seen before from stegosaurus in this franchise. I also want to mention the brief little cameo of the pachycephalosaurus, as they have it tranquilized on one of the monitors. Not much else I can say about it. It seems like its design is fairly consistent with the one that we see in The Lost World. So overall, pretty good. Quite like it. The Gallimimus, this is a good example of one that I don't like. The original Gallimimus was pretty good. Despite the fact that the original one lacked feathers, it had pretty much all of the proportions and the way that it held itself done pretty well. These ones, their arms are in their arms are held a little bit too high up, and of course they fold them underneath their body instead of kind of holding them in a more relaxed way. Their tails are poking up a little bit, and they just kind of have an overall weird posture, as well as seemingly more of a reduced torso. Not really the biggest fan of it. I do think that that's an example of a design that was done better in the original trilogy. But it does seem like they are still portrayed as huge, as, right next to the tour truck right here. they're pretty darn big, and which is good because Gallimimus is the largest ornithomimid. Because Dinochirus is not an ornithomimid. Dinochirus is an ornithomimosaur. Just want to clear that up because there's usually comments whenever I say that. The Parasaurolophus actually looks pretty good. It feels like the design remains pretty consistent with what we've seen before, which means that it still has a lot of the same problems that the original one does, and the fact that it's a lot more thin compared to the real life animal. But it does have its crest, and it actually seems to have a little bit of color, as these ones right here that are lying down have more of like a reddish pink coloration going on, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool, you know? So I do like that consistency. The Triceratops also remains decently consistent with what we've seen before, with the way that that frill looks and the way that the skull looks and the horns and the elephant feet. Ugh. And also the long tail. It also sports more of a gray coloration as well, but it does have its beak, and you know, the nasal horn actually does seem to be a little bit longer here. Again, it's pretty consistent. It does lack the feature scales that the original design had, which is pretty unfortunate because that is something that's accurate about the original design. And because it doesn't have it here, that kind of makes this design less accurate than a movie that came out in 1993. But you know, it's not the end of the world. It is still a fairly decent design, but not a big fan of the Jurassic franchise version of the Triceratops. Well, of course, there are babies. A lot of these animals, they all look pretty good. They look like good representations of what babies would look like in universe. You know, like the Triceratops, which we've seen it before in the Lost World, the baby Gallimimus, the baby Apatosaurus. All of those fellows that we see in the sort of petting zoo. Speaking of Apatosaurus, I quite like their design. They look like classic Apatosaurus designs, which is a good approach to take, because a lot of, like, you know, especially if you're remaining consistent with a lot of these designs, making it look like the actual designs of the past movies, you know, which are mostly based off of 90s reconstructions, then making an Apatosaurus look like a 90s reconstruction is a fair approach, especially with the coloration, which is a lot more dark and really reminds me of images like this that represent Brontosaurus, which is a closely related animal to Apatosaurus. The head looks good. It looks like a decent Diplodocid head. And there's obviously an animatronic that's used for this one, which is really the only practical effect that's used in the whole film in terms of like dinosaur practical effects. The rest of the dinosaurs that we see are all CGI. It looks really good, and I love that they do have something that actors can interact with. The detail is amazing, especially when it's breathing and you can see like just, you know, parts of it moving as it's breathing in and out. Really fantastic work done on that one. And so, yeah, all around, I'd say that the Apatosaurus is a pretty decent design. Next up is the Ankylosaurus, which it has lost its like the coloration that it did have in Jurassic Park 3. Jurassic Park 3 by far has my favorite coloration with the sort of black, white, and red color scheme that it has going on. This one, you know, it has more of a gray coloration, maybe with a little bit hints, like small hints of green. But that's about it. The design does remain consistent with the Jurassic Park 3 one, and it gets demolished by the Indominus Rex as well. You know, that's their lot in life in this movie. There's also the Raptor Squad, the Velociraptors. Once again, we're back talking about the Velociraptors. The Jurassic Park 3 versions, those ones are my favorites, but these ones are pretty cool. I do like the little splashes of color that they are given. Of course, we have Charlie, Delta, Blue, and Echo. As I mentioned in the many interpretations of Velociraptor video, Echo is my favorite. I love her colors. Look at that. Doesn't that look great? I love it. Obviously, Blue kind of takes center stage as the main Velociraptor, as she's the only one to survive this film. So we'll probably talk about her a little bit more as this series goes on for the next two movies. But yeah, they all look pretty good. I like the classic green coloration that you see on Charlie and Delta. And once again, Echo is my favorite. The Pteranodons. These ones are ones that I think took a little bit of a step back compared to the way that they looked in Jurassic Park 3. One positive is that they do lack teeth, which is good. Pteranodon does translate to toothless wing. But it does have a reduced crest, which is something that's reminiscent to female pteranodons, which, I mean, maybe you can see it as that, which is a pretty cool detail if that's the case. And their beaks are a little bit more curved, which is pretty reminiscent to the real life pteranodon. But they are overall a lot more stubby and reduced in their proportions. And of course, you know, they still do lack pycnofibers, which is something the pteranodon did have. So I'm not a big fan of their design, but their portrayal was a lot of fun, you know, as they're like kind of attacking Main Street and even diving into the water, which I thought was a cool detail because Pteranodon was an animal that would likely do something similar to that. And then also it getting eaten by the Mosasaurus, which is also likely. I mean, we've even found Pteranodon vertebrae with shark teeth in it. So they spent some time in water, which gave them the opportunity to get eaten by sharks and things like that. So it's pretty cool to see that represented right here. I just don't really like the design. The blue ones are pretty cool though. After that is the Dimorphodon. This one really looks like a little gremlin. Very different from its real life counterpart. It has more of a blocky skull. It's also larger and it just looks more scary in general. It's not my favorite design in the world. It does seem like they have small amounts of fuzz, or at least judging off of this shot right here. But there's really not much else I could say about them. They took the more scary route in terms of these designs. You know, it looks like they have like tiny T-Rex heads placed onto a little pterosaur body. Just, I don't know. It's an interesting design. Speaking of T-Rex heads, we do have Rexy, who herself has a little bit of a redesign going on here. She is a lot thinner compared to the way she was in the original Jurassic Park, which can be explained by maybe she's not getting enough food, you know? So there's that. She does bulk up by the time we get to Dominion anyway, and that's because they used the original model, which they probably should have done that here. But anyway, I still think that the quality of her CGI is good, and I do really like the added detail of the raptor claw marks on her neck. That was a detail that I loved then, and it's a detail that I still love now. Because just having a T-Rex here that already has history, and you can see the evidence of that history, it's just a nice little detail. And obviously, Rexy fights the Indominus Rex, the big bad of this movie, the first on-screen hybrid that we have in the franchise. I know that canonically she's not the first, but she's the first one that we see. The Indominus, I've never really disliked this design. I actually quite like it. She has these sort of interlocking teeth, a very jagged appearance, long arms with huge claws, and even like a thumb. Like she has an opposable thumb that she can grab things with. A pretty cool roar and an interesting coloration of more so like white and gray. I like her design, you know, and I thought that the idea of having a hybrid that can fill that role of being the sort of movie monster as opposed to making the dinosaurs do that, I thought it was a good route to take, even if they didn't really commit to it in that same movie. But you know, I liked her story. I feel like we could have, like Lakota says, my buddy Lakota, I think that we probably could have taken more of a route to make this dinosaur more sympathetic, which is what it felt like they were trying to do at the beginning of the film, but it feels like they dropped that later on. That could have been a decent route to take, but you know, that's something that they didn't take. Still, I do really like her design, and like kind of diving into all of the different dinosaurs that she's made up of and other such creatures, because she's not just made up of dinosaurs. It's really fascinating stuff. So as far as hybrids go, she's probably one of my favorites. She's not my absolute favorite, but she's up there, you know. Oh yeah, and there's also a brief appearance of a Dilophosaurus as a hologram. It remains pretty consistent with the original. It does seem a little bit larger if we're assuming that this is a life-size Dilophosaurus, but still not as large as the real-life Dilophosaurus. And there we go. Those are the creatures of the first Jurassic World film. Next up, we will be doing Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, which adds a few new creatures. I'm probably going to leave some of them out in the next video, so we're not just repeating the same creatures over and over again. But yeah, there we go. Those are those creatures. If you enjoy dinosaur-related content, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you on board. Thank you so much to all my patrons and my channel members. You guys are all helping out tremendously. And until next time, thank you guys so much for watching, and have an awesome day.